welcome to the Tech Therapy Podcast. I'm your host, BJ Hamaker, the CMO of Nucleus. Tech Therapy is here to save you from busy work so you can focus on what's fulfilling and profitable. Stick around to the end of the show. We'll reveal how you can be our next guest in around 20 minutes. Let's go.
Well, hey, welcome everybody. And this is Eddie Thomason and from DataLocker and the Simply Secure podcast. You want to tell us a little bit about you and what you want to share the most?
Hey guys, like Pace already said, Eddie Thomason here with the Simply Secure podcast. I do have a 9-to-5 job at DataLocker, but I'm very passionate about bringing more awareness to the cybersecurity field from the aspect of helping people enter cybersecurity from all different various backgrounds and industries. Also educating how to develop your career inside of that industry. So going from, maybe somebody that's been in the field for maybe 1 or 2 years and trying to develop into, a VP level or director level, things from that perspective. But then also I share from the top level, from talking to CISOs, which is a chief information security officer, and basically providing information from their peers that will help them continue to upgrade and beef up their security programs. So that's what I'm excited about. That's what the Simply Secure podcast does. And I'm happy to be on here and answer any questions, concerns that you may have.
Yeah, fantastic. So what I want to know is, well, first off, on the podcast, how long have you been doing that? And I would love to chat a little bit more about that first. Yeah,
absolutely. So the Simply Secure podcast started on April 27th this past year. Oh, nice. So the show itself is still fairly new. I just looked at my stats yesterday morning. I post every Wednesday. And yesterday morning, we were actually over 200 downloads already. I think it was like 206 or something like that, which was pretty dope. I was pretty excited.
Yeah, you're building some steam.
So, I mean, one thing is like starting last year, that's important. That's like the tail end of this whole migration, right? So many businesses are going to the cloud, and just massive stories of infrastructural, companies being hacked, which is scary, that things that are so crucial to the internet. Like I remember, what was it, a few months ago or last year where AWS went down for like 3 days or something. And it was, or at least it felt like it, certain services were down for 3 days, and it was just a big deal. But we actually have a cybersecurity expert on our team too, actually. And we've dealt with a few clients in that area because we do app development and website development. And we've seen some scary things, where somebody's linked to somebody's database is indexed on Google and things like that. Very scary. And what's sad is this is just the state of web security if people don't do anything, right?
Yep.
Systems just gradually become obsolete and exploits just become open over time.
Absolutely. I heard on a different cybersecurity podcast, it's called the CISO series with David Spark. And he had a guest on there recently that was communicating like, okay, what's the best way to onboard a security platform, a new piece of software or whatever else it may be. And he said, well, one of the things that you really want to consider is how do I get out of this software? So like most people don't think that, right? Like most people think if they're adding a new piece of tech or something into their tech stack or their cybersecurity stack, they think of it from an aspect of this is going to solve a problem. But at some point, like you said, that technology is going to become obsolete. So then the question is, how do I disengage with this software, 5, 10, 15 years from now, right? Because I need to move on to something that's actually better, right? Or serves my use case a lot in a much better way compared to what I currently have. So it's interesting.
If people aren't maintaining their versions and everything, especially their core technology isn't up to date with respect to the industry, then they do have to do this complete overhaul every 5 to 10 years or something. Yeah,
absolutely.
Which is very interesting. So, so have you essentially been working with more on the client side or more on the education and getting people into cybersecurity? Because I know the career space is pretty huge. I follow a number of TikTokers that get people into data analyst positions because that's a big overlap also with cybersecurity.
Absolutely. So my role and my perspective always comes from the vendor side. So because I transitioned into cybersecurity back in August, but I transitioned as a vendor. So I don't know all the tech skills, right? When you think about all the certifications that you need to have with Security Plus and all these CompTIA Plus, all these different, yeah, exactly. All those things. I don't have those certifications, nor do I ever plan on getting those certifications. I needed to learn the industry in itself, pick the brains of other cybersecurity individuals so I can learn how to serve them the best way as a vendor, right? So I'm pretty much I wouldn't call myself an expert in any means quite yet on vendor relationships, but that's what the idea behind the Simply Secure podcast was really, I guess, selfishly geared towards. Like, how can I add more value to these people who I'm serving on a daily basis so I can understand more of like how they think, why they think that way, so that when I come to them, I'm actually a trusted advisor or a consultant compared to just a guy trying to sell them something, right?
Yeah, that would be really valuable feedback that you get from everybody too.
Yes.
You know, it's kind of a shortcut for a lot of things. Like if you don't know the nitty gritty micro level choices that are being made on the back end, what you are understanding is what a client needs, how they feel about the solutions that you've offered them. That's really valuable.
And you're able to recommend, because if you're working with vendors, you're able to recommend these products, and what they have now are just amazing. We used Micro Focus, I think, on a recent job. Was it Micro? I'll have to look up the name, but yeah, they do penetration testing, automated bot testing, and then cross-site scripting testing, things like that. So there's a lot of these attacks, these exploits that, and one of the biggest things about the industry that people don't realize is businesses aren't typically being targeted. Like they're not typically being attacked for something that they did or something specific about them. There are just these bots that just like phone scammers that just call random people, right? And just hoping to to get access to somebody's computer. They use that social engineering aspect to kind of take control and then ransom. But these are just bots that are operating in foreign countries a lot of the time, and they're just looking for just regular exploits, that very common issues with websites where there are things that are not secured or not locked down behind the right strength password or something like that.
Definitely. One of the things I learned, Pace, is the fact that when you think of hackers, right? Hackers, I'm not going to call them lazy, because they can definitely take apply themselves when they really want to. But you think about the overall mindset of a hacker, they're looking for low-hanging fruit, right? They really don't want to go after like the big, overly complicated and trying to figure out all the different.
They're gonna check what fell on the ground first. Yeah,
exactly. Right. They're looking for easy breaches, not easy breaches, but easy ways to open doors that leads to breaches. Right. So that's, if you put it in a regular old, personal level term, like they're looking for when they walk past up and down the streets, they're looking for when they pull the lock on the door or the handle on the door, the ones that's already open, not the ones that require you to actually pop the lock using some hanger or something like that, right? They're like,
people that would just be going by and just testing door handles and seeing, hey, can I get in with it? It takes them no additional time at all. And they're able to do that. And in some cases, they're able to test with certain scripts and things. They could test thousands of websites at a time using tools like that, where they just see, can I get in? And then when you get in, then it's like, are there walls in all the places? There should be walls or doors. Are there doors with locks inside? So that's very interesting, because it can be easy. It can be very hard to code a system or an admin tool or a website, especially if you have different permission levels for users, to make sure that when you give one person a certain level of authorization, they don't have the ability to access stuff they're not supposed to authorize. So they might have the authentication. They got this free account, didn't cost them anything, this burner email. But then they suddenly can do everything an admin can do because the website doesn't sanitize their routes. They don't secure the APIs. There's all kinds of problems.
Which you brought up a great point there, because one of the ways that you actually minimize that risk there is by implementing zero trust. And you probably heard that as an idea, as a thought process or a buzzword that's inside of the industry at the moment. But most people, their perception towards zero trust is, I don't have access to anything, right? Like my company does not trust me. So like, I don't have access to nothing at all. Right. And it's a hassle. It's a PIA, right. Or PITA, whatever you want to call it.
This paradigm that's been in cybersecurity for a long time, but only really entered, the personal space and really dealing with the user login experience when I first learned about Bitcoin and this concept of like this trustless space where nothing happens without permission. Nothing happens without this private password. And that's the concept, right? Is like nobody has blanket permission. They only get specific permission. And only sometimes in specific cases and usually now for specific periods of time, and then they expire. Then they need to get a new token, and that's really the most secure way to do it that we know of, because it's this arms race for sure.
Right. Well, is that, and then also the fact of like, you brought up a good point, because when you think about zero trust in itself, right, the thought process is really to help people understand that they have access to exactly what they need to have access to perform their job, right? And the benefit there is that if, say, your machine or something like that does get hacked, then the information that's exposed is only information to that particular department. So say, for example, if it's accounting that came on, and then like, the accountant really doesn't need to see everything from marketing and all the sales stuff and all this extra information, right? Or even some, like, yes, they have access to some of the financials to balance the books, but there might be like, future, because when you look at finance as well, you're probably looking at future acquisitions and things that could possibly be there. All those, like, all that information should be it should be siloed, right? Or at least compartmentalized to where though
another way to say it is like need to know, but it can be a little bit different than that, right? For on the one hand, there will be information in your company that everybody knows, or that's public, or that's transparent. That's fine to make those things public, but that decision making power over doing something that's different, that needs to be on a need to access basis. The benefit there too is you don't necessarily want to give people the keys to the castle. They wouldn't know what to do with them, and so you invite just confusion in your admin, your staff, if you just let them do anything.
Okay, but I have the concern of the Area 51 problem. Do you guys ever watch Independence Day, that movie where the aliens come, right? And they blow up Washington, D.C. and still the Area 51 guys didn't tell the president that they found aliens 50 years ago, right? And he's in Air Force One, the most secure plane in the world, and a 747 flying to Los Alamos or Vancouver, or I can't remember where they're going, but anyway, they're flying across America.
Right? Area 51 eventually, yeah.
Everything's destroyed behind him. Everything's destroyed in front of him, and until somebody brings up the fact that aliens came to visit, nobody tells the president of the United States who's in charge of fighting aliens, right? So
he's the thought, and the guy's like, "We might have aliens."
right. Okay, so I watch Independence Day about twice a year. Okay, it's one of the ones. It's in the rotation. All right,
right.
But if everything's siloed, how do you solve that problem? I get zero trust, but sometimes somebody's got to know who doesn't know, and there's this glitch where there's somebody forgot to install a trigger that tells the president that we captured aliens already.
Well, there just needs to be my first answer would be there needs to be a push from the bottom up and the top down, right? You need to be able to tell everybody you need to get as much access as you need, not just as little as you need. But what do you think, Eddie?
So my go-to thought has to come from top down. And the reason why it has to go from top down is because if you, as a team, if you understand what the role is that you're trying to keep safe, right? So like, say, for example, it's an entry level, like you mentioned, Pace, it's a data analyst role, right? They don't need to have access to all the data, like every piece of data that's out there, right? They have to have access to certain pieces that actually allows them to perform their job. But there are going to be some situations where like you got the parameters wrong, right? Like maybe you thought this person doesn't actually have to have access and doesn't have to have access to this data. But then because that person is inside of that role performing their job, that they then identify like, hey, this is actually a hole that I need to have eyes on, right? And then that needs to go up. Obviously, from that person, it needs to go up to say, hey, give me access to this. But then it needs to be reassessed again at that point to understand, is this just this person that needs to have access to it? Or is it like that entire
category of roles?
Exactly. Category of roles inside of that organization, right? So like that, because when you the more people you give access to something, right, the quicker you have an opportunity, the more doorways you have for breaches and things like that, right? And again, in no way, shape, or form am I an expert in this matter, but looking at it from just a logical perspective, you want to give slow access to some of these different individuals that say they need access to it, right?
It's very interesting because like I've dealt with enterprise companies, and it's notorious, right, that if you need to access something, it takes like 2 months to get onboarded because you got to request access to this and request access to that and request access to whatever. And it's super annoying. Like, this isn't a simple issue to solve.
No.
But they weigh it on balance, and they say, you know, especially with how much they have to tell people, don't open any link you get in an email. Make sure you know who it's sending it to, especially, and it's the counterbalance to what I said earlier about businesses not being targeted. Enterprises are targeted like voraciously. Small businesses aren't typically, but when they have this breach, it tanks the business. It kills them, right?
Yep.
The stats are scary.
They die within 50 days or something like that if they get a catastrophic breach.
80% within 6 months or something like this. Really,
really freaking horrible.
Yeah, because what do you have to do? Like you might face this. You might face a government fine on top of the business that you lost and the trust that you lost. Your brand is basically dead in this trifecta. And then the hacker won and you lost everything. There's no restorative justice or at all because obviously the responsibility is on the business to protect the consumer. So yeah, it's definitely a hard systems architecture problem for developers to solve this. But that's why until there are these much easier systems and out of the box systems for accomplishing this, you really just need to work with a professional.
Yep, that's the thing. I bring it back to when you look at a small business, right? And especially if you're gathering information. So you think of like, a lot of small businesses, say one of my small businesses is even a woodworking business. So yes, I collect email information, I collect phone numbers, I connect these things that is supposed to go on invoices and everything else, right? And so technically I have data that can be breached, right? Every business does, especially when you have customer data and things like that. What I typically recommend is consult with different people in cybersecurity, right? Like you might be able, like even as a small business, having some protection is better than no protection, right? But having a false idea of protection is bad. It's very, very bad,
that's
right?
The worst. Yeah.
Like just assuming like, oh, I'm just so small that nobody would ever want to come after my stuff anyway. Where at the end of the day, you could just literally be a part of a search query that spit out you as a piece of low-hanging fruit, right?
Yeah.
So
let me
from
remind
that
people when I say small businesses aren't targeted, what I mean is they're not explicitly, nobody's like putting their business name in there and like
exactly.
I'm going after Eddie's woodworking business.
Right.
Yeah. They're not doing that. But guess what? You show up in Google search results, or you're on a list.
That's right.
And if they just go through, you're just one of 1,000 businesses that they're going to target that day.
Yeah, because they'll have a script that goes and automatically targets 10 million different things that it finds at random, and it doesn't care which one it cracks into. You use the password admin, so you're toast.
Yep,
all they want is another 100 or 1,000 or 10,000 names and emails and phone numbers and stuff that they can sell. And that's mostly it. But then there's also just, other ransomware and things like that do happen.
Absolutely. So yeah, I always try to communicate. And I'm actually having a conversation with somebody on the show in the next couple of weeks about building a security program or having at least an idea of building a security program as your business is launched. So instead of making it an afterthought of like, oh, let me just go find clients and sell my product, is like, hey, if I know I'm going to be gathering clients and I know I'm going to be, acquiring this data, this personalized and private data from my customers, then I probably should at least consult with somebody who's on the security side and say, hey, what should I have in place? Not necessarily as a bare minimum, because if that cybersecurity professional is good at what they do, they'll assess the risk appetite that you have for your business and all these other different factors, but at least have some kind of idea or plan in place to make sure that you can do these different things, right? Like that's really the end goal.
Like what's your bet, just do the better than average best practice for your business size and what you're trying to target. Exactly. Don't have to break the bank. You don't have to go, enterprise level functionality, but yeah, that's that'd be the target because you want to be safe.
So sorry, I keep on having issues with this camera, guys.
That's okay.
The most this has ever happened.
We'll make them work for it. Most of the episodes, there's no issues whatsoever. We need to make them. Yeah,
the audio sounds good.
Audio's been fantastic.
Yeah, all the audio, and you've got like a really engaging presence too, and it's nice to have the video feed. It's good.
Yeah.
So I want to talk more about data, but also I see this book behind you, and I did a little sleuthing, and I see that you've got tons of 5-star reviews for it on Amazon, and it seems like just a really nice book. You want to tell us a little bit more about it?
Absolutely. So the book basically precursored my entire cybersecurity career and everything in itself. But I also, outside of woodworking and the podcast in itself, I have a public speaking business. So the book itself was basically meant to take the things that I've learned being a Black male who grew up in Baltimore City with a single mom, right? And taking all the things that I learned, putting it into how I overcame my circumstances and my environment to become the first student in my high school's history to ever earn a D1 scholarship, to being the first male in my family to ever graduate with a degree, and honestly just breaking generational curses from there, right? So the book is basically built on this premise of it doesn't matter the environment you were born into or the family that you have, you can create success if you choose to make small positive decisions that compound over time.
Be the first or be the second, whatever it is, just go do something new for yourself. Yeah,
exactly. You can be the change that your family needs to see that's been waiting decades in order for it to happen.
Yeah, I love to look back at like stories my father tells me about his life. And then I got my great grandfather's autobiography. He was talking about how, his teacher hated him because he smelled like goats because his job at home was taking care of the goats and he didn't want to breathe through his nose. So she called him a mouth breather, which was accurate. I'm like, what kind of life am I not living? Thank goodness.
Like one of those words. And I'm like, is that supposed to be an insult? And I'm like,
right.
There you go. But like the generational improvements, how big that improvement is kind of up to us. It's kind of up to me. And so like hearing my dad's stories about his childhood and the way like he made very deliberate choices to treat us in ways that were kinder than his father did, and then I have that launch pad. I have that platform that my father gave me, which is a little higher than the one his father gave him, which was a little higher than the one his father gave him. Right. And like, I really hope that my kids have a better go at life than I have. And yet I don't want to make it too cushy or they're not going to try. You know what I mean? Like,
family is a small community. The society is a large community. Like the progress happens, over time and same with technology. Like, but the book is Unlock Yourself, How to Earn the Success You Were Born to Create.
Correct.
Fantastic.
And I'll wrap that up with this statement as well, because you brought up a very intriguing thought. And it kind of boils down to, and I believe it's in the book. If it's not, I even used it as a quote to talk about the book, whatever it may be. But I always talk about how your ceiling that you create with your life, right? All the accomplishments, all the things that you do, all the things that you're able to make come to pass becomes the floor that your kids have to work from, right? So you have to continue to grow. And when I say your ceiling, that doesn't mean your ceiling has to stop at 4 feet, right? Yeah. You can grow it up to 6-foot ceilings and 8-foot ceilings and 13-foot ceilings and all the way up, right? Because whatever you do, you're providing a new floor, a new standard that your kids can operate from, which is going to impact for generations, right? What I found from my perspective is one of the hardest things to do is like you said, Bernard, is the fact that you don't want it to be cushy, right? But I do. So like for me, one of my biggest things that I struggle with in my head is like, okay, I did have to overcome a lot of things, right? I had to overcome a mom raising us on the $13,000 a year income. I had to start working when I was 9 years old. I had to learn a lot of things early on and grow up fast, right? And like, not to say that I want my kids to have to experience that, but I would love for my kids to be exposed to that kind of responsibility without feeling like it has to cripple them, right? Like they have to perform or they just suck at life. Right?
Yeah, that's always been a little bit alien to me. It's like, my kids have to work for it. I'm like, well, do they have to reinvent the wheel? Like maybe they can just do something more, something better if you set them up right and do teach them about responsibility and growth, Like it reminds me of this, was once at a social gathering. It was a well-off community. I was a young married couple, and my partner was hearing these other people chatting, these other women chatting about like somebody buying a house, and they're like, oh, is it a big person house with tall ceilings? the whole like raising the ceiling thing reminded me of that. But it's funny because there are people that are born into a life where they do have the privileges that prevent them from kind of wanting more. And then there's also people born into a life with no privileges, and they think that they've got this steel ceiling above them, and they also don't want more. And the answer isn't to, demonize either of those. It's that everybody, no matter where they start, should be setting up something better for the next group. And that you can also do that yourself, no matter where you started from.
I also say it this way. I say, listen, if you were born broke, it's not your fault. But if you die broke, it's your fault.
Yeah.
You got the same amount of resources and everything that everybody else has in life, right? I mean, like, obviously there's a lot of racial tensions and things like that. So there's arguments like, oh, do we really have equality and things like that? All those things could be communicated, right? But at the same time, if you change your perspective and you look for the solutions instead of dwelling on the problem, you'll be exposed to different things. You can leverage, say being Black, right? You can leverage being Black for getting a whole lot of scholarships that a lot of other races can't get, right? Or you can leverage the fact of being Black and take advantage of a lot of other, what do you call them, like grant programs and things like that that's not available to other people, right? Like there are resources out there. You just got to change the perspective of like, because I am this, I can't do this. But if you change it to, I want to accomplish this, so how do I go about it? Then your mind is then focused on how can I actually accomplish this task, not, oh, I'm limited, so I'll never be able to actually achieve it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I mean, like I read Heidegger when I was 16, and it like basically forced me to like take ownership of my life. Like I'd been given a religious framework by my parents. Am I going to use that, or am I going to reject it? Well, it's my decision. I better just make a choice. I've been given a culture. Am I going to be an American? Am I going to be a Californian? Like all these different things, like to begin with, it made me understand, like, I'm not inherently any of those things. Like I'm inherently a human being, and a human being is a kind of creature that can do this and this and this.
You experience everything in your context, and you have choices in that context. You get to choose. You get to choose to change the context in some ways.
If you want to move to a different context, then you'll have different tools and obstacles in that other context. But you'll always have tools and obstacles. Always.
Yep. And definitely some people face different friction and worse friction, definitely. But that doesn't mean it gets rid of their choices. And caring people want to help. They want to reverse that, and so we can take advantage of that too. Absolutely. That's such a fantastic perspective. I think it's really kind of this good middle ground to help people understand. Like, you can start behind. Everybody starts from zero, right? Though everybody starts with a lot of the same struggles of just not knowing what to do. And even accomplished business owners cannot know how to get to the next level. Even wealthy people cannot know how to parent. There's all kinds of things.
Exactly.
But it's man, I'm really glad you did a book like that, just telling your story about how, how you got from point A to point B, and you're doing something now that's, endeavoring to protect thousands, millions of people from, hardship. So especially
Absolutely.
because of bad actors. So yeah, no, that's fantastic stuff. Well,
Thank you.
yeah, I mean, where are you taking it from here? I mean, you're hoping to continue to grow that podcasting business and speaking business.
So I would say
else?
that the biggest focus right now is definitely the podcast in itself. And the reason behind it is because, do I love speaking, and do I still take every once in a while different opportunities? Absolutely. Right. But it's a matter of my priorities, and my priorities, I make choices based off of my values. Number one value is my faith. Number two is my family. Number three is actually or if I want to go, I'm not going to give you the subsections. So because it'll go entirely too.
How
too
much more
depth,
important is your family? You got to put a number on it, or
because in family you have, you also have your marriage, and then your kids, and then you kind of like, you can break it down to subcategories and things from that perspective.
Is my sister
but instead
more
of
important than my mom?
Right. But I take those things, I take, the values, and I make decisions based off of those values. So at the end of the day, I got young kids. I got a 3-year-old and a 2-year-old, right? Two young boys. And
we both know the baby space. Yeah. We multiple babies. Yeah.
100%. And we're not done yet either. We definitely want to have more. So that'll be another conversation for another time.
Sure.
But, but I would say definitely overall, yes. Overall, I didn't, I scaled back the speaking side of things primarily because I had to travel, right? I feel like, during 2020, it was kind of great because you can do everything virtually. And now that 2020 is over, right? And things are opening back up, which is an incredible thing. I love that. But I don't want to be the road dog that never gets to see my family, right? Like kids, I got to see my kids grow up through FaceTime or Zoom calls or anything like that, right? So the biggest thing for me right now is basically growing the podcast, growing the Simply Secure podcast, because I feel as though there's so many different avenues that I can take it, right? There's an aspect of the training and education, because I feel like there's just not enough of it from the aspect of like how it actually applies to business. Like I know there's obviously all the certifications, and that's a business in itself to get certifications and everything else.
Farthest possible thing from the mind of this.
Exactly. So it's like the idea of breaking away, like the education side of it and training side of it, but also just overall awareness, right? I although it's a growing industry, I feel like most people, they hear about it because it's like, oh, I can get into cybersecurity and make 6 figures. I mean, yeah, that's great, right? But at the end of the day, you should be more aware of how to make sure that your information as an individual is private, right? And safe and secure. And there's like ways to make sure that you're accomplishing that, right? And making sure that your kids' information is private, right? And educating your kids on these different things.
Like the junior, like the entry level tech people, they're like giving their kids iPads, and then like the veteran tech elite, they're like, I don't have anything, that connects to the internet. I shoot my printer if it makes a weird noise.
Exactly. So that's, my whole mindset behind, those two pieces of the podcast is, yes, it'll grow from that perspective. But then also, I think eventually as the audience and everything else grows, the biggest thing for me is providing a space for other vendors as well as other security professionals, mostly probably like CISOs and different type of VPs that can share things that actually works, right? Because at the end of the day, there's a lot of theories out there, and there's not a lot of, hey, this is something that you can fall back on and make sure that you have these things in place to make sure that your organization that you're now securing or responsible for securing is accomplished in that fashion, right? But providing that platform for people who don't already have one, it's like, oh, if I come on a Simply Secure podcast, at least I'll be made aware to multiple different people that is like relevant to me, and then go from there to see if that leads to anything in success, or like small business success or anything like that.
And you said CISO, and for our listeners that are small business owners, correct me if I'm wrong, that's CISO,
correct.
Chief Information Security Officer. So if you don't necessarily want to pay, as your second employee, full-time CISO, but you can work with Eddie Thomason.
BCSOs.
Yeah, to do a contract CISO service, essentially, where you identify the best practice, bare bones. You can spend $500 a month or $2,000 one time or whatever it is, or on up from there, obviously, depending on the level of security you need to secure your business and make sure it's safe. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, great. Any additional questions for us, or let's make sure people can get to you. Where can we find your podcast and everything else?
So wherever you listen to podcasts is where it'll show up, right? So, I mean, if you're on Stitcher, if you're on Podchaser, if you're on Apple, if you're on Spotify, you can find it on all those places. If you're a visual guy like me, and you want to actually see people talking, then you can actually pull it up on YouTube. So every episode is released on YouTube as well. But yeah, I mean, anywhere you want to go, if you want to actually, be a part of the email list and everything else, you can go to simplysecurepodcast.com. And all of that information is going to be on there for you guys to sign up for the newsletter in itself, get notified every single time a new thing is launched. I'm also working on bonus content at the moment as well. So to give people a little bit of an idea of what that looks like. So the podcast is geared towards tech people, right? Cybersecurity professionals who are learning about the space in itself. So sometimes I don't want to release episodes to the whole that is not necessarily on topic with what we talk about. So I've been working on some bonus content, like, for example, branding yourself, personal brand. How does that affect your ability to get hired in cybersecurity? What can you do now as you're doing all your different pieces? Yesterday,
it was the most eye-opening thing for me. I was like, I teach career coaching too at a coding school, and it's man, I had this connection where I'm like, I'm reading this book about making a good business offer for like sales and marketing. And like, that's the same thing that people are trying to do when they're trying to get a job. They're just trying to sell one product to one customer and keep that customer for a long time. So it's, they really need to think about it that way and realize that, is it your best solution to just like apply to a bunch of places like all at once? Is that the way you reach customers? I don't know.
Right. Exactly.
But it's actually counterintuitive, especially in the tech space now.
100%. And most people, it's funny because tech people, the stereotype typically fits, right? Oh, I'm a tech person. I'm like a hermit. I don't really want to get out and like promote myself. I call them like the salt of the earth type of people. They don't really need the accolades. They don't really want all the extra, the attaboys. Yeah. It's just kind of like, do the work. Here, I do my job, right?
And they do it for the thrill too of like, solving a complex problem. I could tell like hours last night. I was like, how do I like it's a very simple script too. It's like, how do I make this matrix show up the way I want the numbers to show up? And it's just fun,
Yep, exactly. But when you take, time, like that's why I'm working on some of the bonus materials and stuff like that, because when you take the time to help educate them on how to promote themselves and talk about themselves and the things that they've accomplished, it makes them so much more valuable to other organizations. And obviously, you can upgrade your salary, which upgrades your life, which upgrades, hopefully, your work-life balance, things like that. Right. So those are the things that I want to, implement there. Also like specific training. So like I had a guy on the show who is all in the OSINT, which is open source intelligence. And he basically went through an entire example of how to use open source intelligence to identify all of your information that's either been a part of a breach that's out there, like all these different ways that you can identify that. Well, we didn't go as far as the dark web, but he did mention that's a way to actually find those things, right? But you take all of that, and then he also goes through and shows you, here's how you actually delete it. So you can find out how to delete yourself and your digital footprint off the internet as much as possible, right? So then that way you really don't are not succumb to breaches and things like that, or getting hacked because your information is just not readily available. They have to do so many other things.
Just reduce the number of surprises,
Exactly. So those are the bonus contents that I'm like, all right, that might be a little bit too much to try to fit into a 30-minute conversation, but I can record it and release it as like an hour-long. Hey, if you're interested in it, go through.
Video like that on TikTok, just like how to remove your yourself from the internet or something like that. Crazy. It'd be so good. Yep.
So, but yeah, that's some of the things that's been going on. So if you're open to that, I got to still figure out what the pricing plans and all that other stuff is going to be for the bonus content. But because we're still new, right?
About that. We've been working with a lot of people on those types of solutions right now, like building course content and let's definitely chat about that. And I'd love to 100%. See, if we could participate in Simply Secure podcast too, because I don't know, I get such a thrill talking about how to get a job in the tech space.
Yeah,
nobody knows how to do it. And the first one is the hardest, and then they just know how to do it after that.
Yep.
And it's just the most stressful thing for people, and which is frustrating because it's the most lucrative space now.
Mm-hmm.
Very important. Cool.
100%. We could definitely have you on the show, Pace. I think that'll be an incredible conversation.
Thanks.
Because most people don't know.
Yeah. No, and the solutions aren't that complicated. Like there's a few best practices. That's it.
Yep. 100%.
Cool. Well, we'll keep that in suspense. But good chatting with you, Eddie. We're really glad to have you here. And anybody that wants to take a look at it, go to the Simply Secure podcast on all podcast channels and YouTube. And that, I'm very interested in checking more of that out myself.
Absolutely. And I will say, lastly, for anybody who wants to connect with me personally, you can definitely go over to LinkedIn. That's going to be my primary source of connectedness. I am across all the other platforms, like, you might see posts on Instagram and things like that. But as far as where I spend my personal time is on LinkedIn. I just don't have time for everything else.
Yeah. Cool. Eddie Thomason on LinkedIn. Fantastic.
All right.
Okay,
Thanks, Eddie.
We'll chat later.
Absolutely. Thank you, guys. Appreciate the time.
BJ Hamaker here. Thanks for listening to the Tech Therapy Podcast. If you're a successful business owner and would like to be a guest on the show, please visit techtherapypodcast.com. If you got something out of this interview, would you share this link on social media or a screenshot or just your comments and include the hashtag TechTherapyPodcast? If you know someone who would be a great guest, tag them on social media and let them know about the show. And remember to use our hashtag TechTherapyPodcast. I love seeing your posts and your guest suggestions. We are regularly putting out new content, so please make sure you don't miss anything by hitting subscribe. Your thumbs up, your ratings, your reviews, your comments, they go a long way to promote the show in the algorithms. So please go ahead and, give us a nice comment or review the podcast. If you want to know more, please go to techtherapypodcast.com or follow the show on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. On Instagram, we're at Tech Therapy Podcast. Thank you for listening. We appreciate your time, and we'll see you next time.